Baby found German Shepherd waiting outside a burned house. What she did next left everyone in tears. You think you've seen kindness? Think again. What happened between a child and a wounded animal in the middle of nowhere has turned into one of the most heartwarming stories of the year. It's raw, it's real, and it will restore your faith in humanity. Don't forget to like, share, and tell us where you're watching from. The street was unnaturally quiet that morning, the kind of silence that feels heavy on your chest. A pale gray haze lingered in the air, the bitter scent of burnt wood still clinging stubbornly to the cold November breeze. Ash drifted down lazily, like snow that had lost its purity, settling over broken shingles, twisted beams, and the blackened skeleton of what had once been someone's home. At the edge of the rubble sat a figure, still, unblinking. A German Shepherd, her once golden coat now dulled and streaked with soot, stared at the empty doorway that no longer existed. She didn't move when footsteps crunched on the charred gravel. She didn't flinch when a strip of police tape fluttered wildly in the wind. Her gaze stayed locked on that hollow space, as if sheer willpower could rebuild it, as if staring long enough could bring something or someone back. Her posture wasn't restless. It was rooted, almost statuesque, but her eyes, they carried the storm. They were the kind of eyes that had seen too much and couldn't unsee it. People passing by whispered about her, shaking their heads. "Poor thing must have lost her family," someone murmured. Another voice replied, "Dogs like that, they don't move until they're ready." No one stepped closer. The dog's loyalty seemed carved in stone. It was easy to assume she was alone now, the last witness to a tragedy that had already claimed everything else. But then, a sound, so faint it could have been the wind pushing through the broken beams. At first, the listener thought it was just the creak of settling wood, the leftover groan of a house surrendering to ruin. But the German Shepherd's ears twitched. Slowly, she lifted her head, scanning the rubble with deliberate focus. Her body stiffened, tail lowered, and she took one cautious step toward the wreckage. The sound came again, this time unmistakable. Muffled, high-pitched, desperate. A cry. Not a bark, not a whine. A human cry. Tiny, fragile. Heartbeats quickened. Was it possible? In all this destruction, in all this silence, could there still be life? The dog took another step, glancing back over her shoulder, almost as if urging someone, anyone, to follow her lead. Her paws sank into the soot as she moved closer to the ruins, nose working furiously. She stopped beside a pile of scorched timber, ears pricked, gaze locked. If you saw this, the question hangs heavy in the smoke-filled air, what would you do? Because in that moment, the air shifted. This was no longer the story of a house fire, no longer just a sad image of a loyal dog in the aftermath of loss. Something more was hidden here, something more fragile than fire and stronger than ash. And what happened next would not only break the silence of that morning, it would leave an entire town in tears. Her name was Claire Mason, though on Willow Street, nobody called her that. Here, she was just Miss Claire, the woman with the rose bushes that bloom twice every spring, the one who always had a pie cooling on the kitchen windowsill and who never forgot a neighbor's birthday. She had lived in the same two-story White House for almost 3 decades, and in that time, she had seen the street change, young couples move in and raise children, families move away for jobs, and older homes get replaced with newer ones. But never had she seen anything like the scene that awaited her this morning. Claire had been awake before dawn, a restless kind of wakefulness that comes when you can smell smoke in your dreams. She wasn't sure what time she'd first heard the sirens, but the distant wail had been enough to draw her to the window, where she'd seen the red and blue lights flickering at the far end of the street. She'd told herself she'd wait for sunrise before walking down. After all, firefighters didn't need curious neighbors getting in their way. But by 7 o'clock, she was standing at the corner, cardigan pulled tightly around her shoulders. The air was thick, the smell of burnt wood hanging heavy and stubborn, mixed with something metallic that made the back of her throat sting. At the end of the block, the Patterson place was barely recognizable. Where there had been a neat little blue house with white shutters and a porch swing, there was now a blackened skeleton. The roof had caved in, jagged beams jutted upward like broken ribs. Glass glittered on the ground like scattered ice. Smoke still drifted lazily from somewhere deep inside, curling into the pale November sky. Yellow police tape flapped in the wind, tied to the mailbox and a bent section of fence. Firefighters moved with tired efficiency, rolling up hoses and stacking equipment into the back of the truck. The hum of the engines was low and constant, the kind of background noise that made the silence of everything else even more pronounced. A small knot of neighbors had gathered, their voices hushed but urgent. Claire caught fragments of conversation. "I heard they didn't make it out. The fire started so fast. They say it was the kitchen." No one seemed certain, but the look in their eyes told Claire they feared the worst. It was then that she noticed the dog. Off to one side, just beyond the stretch of scorched lawn, sat a German shepherd. Her fur was mottled with ash and soot, dulled to a muted tan and gray. She sat with her back straight, front paws planted firmly, one back leg bent awkwardly as though she were favoring it. Her ears were up, but her eyes, deep, dark pools, were locked on the empty doorway of the ruined house. No one went near her. A man in a baseball cap gave her a cautious glance and shook his head. "Must be a stray," he muttered to another neighbor. "Or maybe there's. Either way, I wouldn't get too close. Look at her, she's guarding something." Claire lingered at the edge of the police tape, watching the animal. There was no restless pacing, no nervous whining. The dog's stillness was purposeful. She wasn't looking for food or water. She wasn't scanning the crowd. She was waiting. The fire chief gave a final nod to his crew, and one by one the trucks began to pull away. The low hum of engines faded, replaced by the soft hiss of wind moving through charred remains. The crowd began to drift apart, their voices growing faint as they returned to their warm kitchens and untouched breakfasts. But Claire stayed. She couldn't quite say why, only that something in her chest ached at the sight of that dog, alone in front of the wreckage. Her gaze kept returning to the way the animal's head tilted slightly every time the wind changed direction, the way her tail lay still but not tucked in fear. Claire thought of the Pattersons, the time she'd seen the father mowing the lawn, the mother tending the flower beds, the sound of a child's laughter drifting across the fence in summer. She wondered if the dog had been there the night before, maybe sleeping at the foot of a bed or near the front door, only to wake in chaos and heat. She imagined her staying through the roar of flames, through the shouting, through the collapse. And now, with the fire out and the house reduced to shadows of what it once was, she remained. Claire took one step closer, her shoes crunching on the brittle remains of what might have been the front walkway. The dog's ears twitched. For a moment, Claire thought she might turn her head, but she didn't. Her eyes stayed fixed on the blackened doorway. There was loyalty in that gaze. And grief. Whatever had happened here, Claire knew one thing with certainty: this dog wasn't leaving. Not yet. Maybe not ever. And if the rest of the neighborhood could walk away, she couldn't. Claire couldn't stop thinking about that German shepherd. All through the night, every time she closed her eyes, she saw those dark, unblinking eyes fixed on the burned-out doorway. By morning, she had stopped pretending she wasn't going back. The frost still clung to the grass as she walked, the cold air burning her lungs. Smoke still lingered faintly in the breeze, mixing with the sharp bite of winter. The Patterson house stood at the end of the street like a ghost, blackened walls rising out of the debris, its windows nothing but hollow sockets. And there she was, in the same place as if she'd never moved. The shepherd's fur was still streaked with ash, her injured leg tucked in slightly, her breath rising in small puffs that vanished into the air. She didn't lift her head when Claire approached. She only moved her eyes, following her from the corner of her vision. "Hey, sweetheart," Claire murmured, keeping her voice low, her steps slow. The dog's ears twitched, but she stayed still. Claire crouched a little, trying to look smaller, less threatening. That's when she heard it, the low, steady growl rolling out of the dog's chest. It wasn't sharp or aggressive, more like a quiet barrier she was placing between them. "I see you. Don't come any closer." Claire froze, palms open. "It's all right. I'm not here to hurt you," she said gently. From this distance, she could see the grief in those eyes, a heaviness that went beyond the shock of the fire. And she could smell it too, the lingering scent of smoke clinging to her fur, mixed with something faintly metallic. Not blood exactly, but the ghost of an old injury. She reached into her coat pocket, pulling out half a sandwich she'd wrapped that morning. She tore off a piece of bread and held it out. The shepherd's nose twitched, but her eyes kept flicking back to the house, as though the food was nothing compared to what might still be inside. Claire set the bread down in the frost and stepped back, but the dog didn't touch it. She poured water into the lid of her thermos and slid it closer, but again, nothing. "You're not leaving, are you?" Claire whispered. The dog's ears twitched again, but her gaze didn't move. Then, from somewhere deep in the rubble, came a faint creak. Claire glanced toward the house. Old buildings groaned like that when the wind shifted. She'd heard it before. But the dog's reaction was instant. Her body stiffened, ears high, eyes locked on the source of the sound. She rose to her feet, limping slightly, and stepped toward a collapsed section of wall. "What is it?" Claire asked under her breath. The shepherd nosed at the debris, then looked back at Claire, not just a glance, but something almost deliberate, as if asking her to follow. Claire frowned, stepping up to the police tape. Another sound came, not the groan of wood this time, but something softer. High-pitched, muffled, almost like crying. Her skin prickled. She leaned forward, straining to hear, but the noise was gone. Still, the dog didn't move her gaze. She gave a short, urgent whine, then pawed at the ground. Claire's heart began to pound. She didn't know what she was hearing, or if her mind was playing tricks on her, but one thing was certain: the dog knew. She knew, and she wasn't leaving until someone else understood it too. Claire didn't sleep much that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the German shepherd's gaze, the way she'd stood so suddenly at that strange noise, the way she had looked back, not at the ruins, but directly at Claire, like she was trying to speak without words. By dawn, Claire already knew where she'd be going. The cold was sharper that morning, the frost crunching under her boots as she walked. A pale sun was trying to push through the haze, but the air still smelled faintly of smoke, as though the fire had decided to linger in the neighborhood long after its work was done. As she turned the corner, her breath caught. The dog was still there. She looked worse. Her head was lower now, her shoulders drooped, and ash still clung to her coat like a second skin. Her injured legs seemed stiffer, and Claire could see her sides moving with each breath, slow and labored. Still, she sat in that same spot, eyes fixed on the hollowed-out doorway. Claire didn't try to go straight to her this time. Instead, she lowered herself to the curb a good distance away. "You're still here," she murmured, her voice barely above the whisper of the wind. She talked about nothing in particular: the cold, the frost on the rooftops, the way the street used to smell of fresh-cut grass in the summer. She wasn't sure if the words mattered or if it was just the sound of them, but she kept going, letting her voice drift across the space between them. Minutes passed. The dog's ears twitched occasionally, but she didn't move. Then, without warning, she rose. The movement was slow but deliberate. She limped toward a section of the collapsed wall, her paws crunching over charred wood. Halfway there, she stopped, turned her head, and looked at Claire. The look wasn't casual. It was intent, holding her there, pulling her in. Claire stood, heart beating faster, and stepped past the police tape. The dog turned back to the debris and took another step, then glanced over her shoulder again. Claire followed, the cold biting through her gloves as she steadied herself against a leaning beam. And then she heard it. At first, it was buried under the groan of shifting wood and the whisper of the wind, but once her ears found it, there was no mistaking it, a muffled, trembling cry. Not loud, but steady, like the sound of someone too weak to shout. Her breath caught in her throat. She crouched, pressing her ear toward the sound. It was coming from deep under a tangle of scorched boards and insulation. "Oh my God," she whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. She looked at the dog, who was now standing just beside her, eyes locked on the spot. Is there someone in there?" Claire's voice shook. She scrambled to move a piece of wood, her fingers stinging from the cold and the grit of ash. Beneath it, something pale caught her eye. Not white, but the faded, smoke-stained cream of fabric. She pulled at another board, then another. The sound grew clearer, a high-pitched wail that wavered and cracked. Claire's hands were trembling now, her breath fogging in the air. She reached into the gap and touched something soft, warm. It was a blanket, burnt at the edges but intact. And inside it, Claire gasped, her knees almost giving way. The baby, tiny, face flushed red from crying, eyes squeezed shut, fists clenched in the folds of the blanket. "Oh, sweetheart." "Oh, no, no, no," Claire whispered, lifting the child into her arms. The baby's cry grew louder, urgent, and Claire could feel the heat radiating from her small body, the smell of smoke clinging to her skin. The dog let out a short, sharp bark, the first sound Claire had heard from her in 2 days. It wasn't aggressive. It was relief. Claire clutched the baby to her chest, looking down at the shepherd. "You knew," she said, her voice breaking. "All this time, you were waiting for someone to listen." The dog stepped closer, touching her nose to the blanket, then pulling back, watching with a look that needed no translation. Claire didn't waste another second. She turned toward the street, shouting for help, her voice carrying down the block. Doors opened, footsteps pounded on the pavement, voices rose in confusion. But Claire barely registered them. All she felt was the weight of the baby in her arms, and the unshakable knowledge that without this dog, no one would have ever known she was here. Claire's voice cut through the morning air like a crack in glass. "Help! Somebody, please!" The urgency in it startled even her, sending a tremor through her chest. Doors creaked open along Willow Street, faces appearing in windows. A man in a heavy work jacket jogged toward her, confusion etched into his features. "What's wrong?" he called, still halfway up the block. "There's a baby," Claire shouted back, clutching the small bundle tighter. "She's alive." The man's jog turned into a run, his boots crunching over the frost. Others followed, drawn by the sharpness of her voice. But when they reached the edge of the debris, their expressions faltered. The jagged pile of blackened beams and smoldering fragments didn't look like a place anything could have survived. "You're sure?" one man asked, his brow furrowing. "She's in here," Claire said, her voice fierce now. "I heard her, I felt her." The baby gave another thin cry, as if to prove her right. Heads turned at the sound, and the disbelief melted into startled urgency. "We need the fire crew back," someone said, fumbling for a phone. While the call went out, Claire turned to look at the German shepherd. She hadn't moved from her position near the gap in the rubble, her body angled toward the baby like a shield. Even when the neighbors stepped closer, she stayed there, tail low, muscles taut, eyes locked on the child. Every time someone reached in to clear debris, her head followed their hands, her gaze sharp, as though making sure no one harmed what she had fought so hard to protect. Within minutes, the low rumble of engines grew louder. 2 fire trucks pulled up, brakes squealing softly on the frosty pavement. The crew piled out, still smelling faintly of last night's smoke, eyes narrowing when they saw Claire standing at the ruins, cradling the baby. "Is she breathing?" a firefighter asked, already moving toward her. "Yes," Claire said quickly. "She's weak, but she's breathing." She was under there. She gestured toward the tangle of beams where the dog still stood watch. "I couldn't get her all the way out. She's hurt." The firefighter glanced at the debris, then at Claire, his skepticism flickering. "That's impossible. This place was cleared." "Well, you missed her," Claire snapped, her voice sharper than she intended. "And if it weren't for her," she pointed at the shepherd, "this baby wouldn't be here." That seemed to be enough. The crew sprang into action, pulling on gloves, shouting short commands to each other. 2 men approached the dog cautiously, but she didn't back away. She simply shifted just enough to let them work, never taking her eyes off the baby. The air grew heavy with the smell of wet ash and scorched wood as they began lifting pieces of the collapsed wall. Every movement sent fine clouds of gray dust into the air, making everyone cough. The sound of shifting beams echoed like thunder in the stillness. One firefighter knelt to peer deeper into the gap Claire had been working on. "There's more debris on top of her," he called. "We'll have to go slow." Claire's arms ached from holding the baby so tightly, but she couldn't let go. She stepped back to give them room, her heart pounding in her ears. The shepherd moved with her, staying just a half step from the child, her head dipping to sniff the blanket every few seconds, as though checking for herself that the little one was still there. Piece by piece, the firefighters cleared the way. A charred doorframe groaned as it was lifted free, revealing a narrow pocket of space. Inside, they found what was left of a crib, its wood blackened but somehow still holding shape. The blanket in Claire's arms matched the tattered remnants draped inside. It hit her then. The baby had been in that crib when the fire started. One firefighter muttered something under his breath, a prayer, maybe, before calling for the medic. The baby was transferred gently into the medic's arms, her tiny fists still clinging to the blanket. The shepherd leaned in, pressing her nose to the child's cheek. The baby made a faint, shuddering sound, and for the first time since Claire had seen her, the dog's body seemed to relax. The medic turned, hurrying toward the waiting ambulance. Claire watched them go, her chest tight with something between relief and awe. She looked back at the shepherd, just in time to see her legs tremble. "Hey!" Claire stepped forward, but the dog had already sunk to the ground, her body curling into itself. Not in fear, not in defeat, just exhaustion. One of the firefighters knelt beside her, running a hand gently over her soot-caked fur. "She's dehydrated. Probably hasn't eaten in days. Let's get her to the vet." Claire crouched, her fingers brushing the shepherd's side. She felt the slow, steady rise and fall of her breathing. "You did it," she whispered. "You saved her." The dog's eyes closed, her head resting against the cold ground, but there was a softness in her face now, a quiet satisfaction that needed no words. As the crew lifted her onto a stretcher, Claire stood back, watching them carry both survivors, the baby to the ambulance, the dog to the waiting animal rescue van. The air was still heavy with smoke, but the sound of the sirens starting up again felt different this time. Not an alarm. A promise. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and something faintly sweet, like the faint trace of flowers trying to mask what lingered in the walls. Claire sat in the waiting room, her hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee she'd barely touched. Through the glass doors at the end of the hallway, she could see the blur of blue scrubs moving back and forth, the soft beeps of machines, the occasional murmur of voices. Somewhere beyond that door was the baby, alive, breathing, and, for the moment, safe. They'd taken her in immediately, whisking her past the admitting desk into the pediatric wing. Claire had caught just a glimpse of her tiny face before the nurses disappeared down the hall, eyes closed, skin pale, but chest rising and falling in a fragile rhythm. The sight had been enough to loosen the knot in her chest, though it didn't stop the questions that had been circling in her mind since she found her. Across town, the German Shepherd was getting her own treatment. The animal rescue team had rushed her to a veterinary clinic, where the vet later told Claire they'd found burns along her flank, smoke damage in her lungs, and dehydration so severe they were surprised she'd been able to stand. But she had stood. She had stood for 2 days without leaving her post. Later that afternoon, a police detective came to speak with Claire. He was middle-aged, his coat dusted with the lingering ash from the scene. His voice was calm but edged with the weight of bad news. The Patterson house had indeed belonged to the baby's parents. Both had been found in what remained of the kitchen, and there was no chance they'd survived the fire. The cause was still under investigation, but the working theory was an electrical fault, a faulty outlet that had sparked in the night while the family slept. Claire closed her eyes as he spoke, picturing the house as it had been before. The warm glow of the porch light in the evening, the sound of laughter drifting out on summer nights. All of it gone now, leaving behind only the child, wrapped in the blanket that had shielded her from the worst of the heat and smoke. The detective's tone softened. "The dog, she's theirs. We scanned her microchip at the clinic. Her name's Bella, 6 years old. No other registrations on record." Bella. The name settled into Claire's chest like it belonged there. She thought of those dark, steady eyes, the way the shepherd had stood her ground, unwilling to leave until someone understood. "She was with them when it happened," Claire said quietly. "She must have been." The detective nodded. "From what we can tell, she stayed near the baby the whole time. Probably lay over her. That blanket was between them. It's likely what kept her alive long enough for you to hear her." In her mind, Claire could see it, the fire starting small, the air filling with smoke, Bella's ears catching the first sounds of panic. The parents trying to reach the crib but cut off by flames. Bella finding her way there, pressing close, her body a barrier against the heat, the blanket pulled between them. The long hours afterward, the silence broken only by the baby's weak cries and Bella's quiet, steady breathing. And when the fire crew had come and gone, missing what was still hidden in the rubble, Bella had stayed, waiting, watching. Over the next few days, Claire visited them both. The baby, now listed in hospital records as Jane Doe, until paperwork caught up, was slowly gaining strength. Nurses told her the smoke damage to her lungs was minimal thanks to how she'd been shielded. They smiled when Claire stopped by, saying, "Your little friend is fighting hard." At the clinic, Bella was improving too. The burns were healing, her breathing easier, but she still carried that same watchfulness. When Claire walked in, Bella's ears would lift, and she'd shift on her bed, tail tapping faintly against the floor. The first time Claire reached out to scratch behind her ear, Bella leaned into her hand with a low sigh, the sound of someone finally allowing themselves to rest. Claire brought treats, though Bella seemed more interested in sitting beside her than eating. They didn't need words between them. It was enough just to be near each other. Claire would tell her about the baby's progress, about how the color was returning to her cheeks, about how she'd opened her eyes for the first time that morning. Bella would watch her with those deep, knowing eyes, as though she understood every syllable. By the end of the week, the hospital staff had started making small jokes about Claire's girls, a title she didn't correct. There was no official plan yet for what would happen to either of them. The state was looking for relatives, paperwork was moving slowly, but Claire knew she wasn't going anywhere. Not from the baby. Not from Bella. Every evening, she found herself thinking of the fire again, imagining the heat, the darkness, The way Bella must have stood between that fragile life and the end. She'd seen bravery before, in people, in moments of crisis. But what Bella had done, that was loyalty in its purest form. And now, as Claire sat in the clinic one quiet afternoon, Bella resting her head on her lap, she realized something. The story wasn't over just because they were safe for the moment. They had lost their home, their family, their world. But maybe, just maybe, they'd found something new too. The first official letter arrived folded in thirds, the county seal embossed in blue on heavy paper that felt colder than it looked. Claire read it at the kitchen table with the baby monitor humming beside a glass of lukewarm tea, the paper's corners damp where her fingers wouldn't let go. Child Protective Services was initiating placement procedures for the infant currently registered as Jane Doe. A separate notice from Animal Control stated that the microchipped German Shepherd, Bella, was to be transferred from the clinic to the county shelter, pending disposition. 2 envelopes. 2 parallel fates. One word pulsing between them like a siren. Separated. At the hospital earlier that day, a social worker with kind eyes and a tight timeline had explained the math of it. "We always look for family first," she said, clipboard pressed to her stomach like armor. "If no relatives are found, we place with a licensed foster home. It's temporary, but we err on the side of structure." When Claire asked about Bella, the woman's pause was almost apologetic. Pets go through a different system. They can't be placed with a minor in foster care without pre-approval, and, well, you see the problem. "I see a baby who only settles when she smells smoke on a dog's fur," Claire answered, surprising herself with the steadiness in her voice. "And a dog who waited 2 days to make sure that baby wasn't alone. Whatever system you've got, it doesn't understand what those two are to each other." The social worker's smile had been brief and tired. "I do understand, Ms. Whitaker. But I also have rules." By nightfall, the story had already outrun the rules. The fire chief's deputy, who'd seen Claire pull ash from her hair with shaking hands while the shepherd hovered like a shadow, posted a single photo on the station's community page. A soot-smudged dog pressing her nose to a pink hospital blanket. No names, just a caption, "Bravery has 4 paws." It was shared 100 times before Claire finished washing bottles. 1,000 by morning. Someone clipped a grainy, gentle video the charge nurse had filmed during a supervised visit. Bella wagging once, carefully, as the baby's small fist unfurled around a tuft of her ear. The comments were a river of strangers writing like they knew them. "Keep them together. Find a way. Please." The next day brought a meeting at the hospital with too many chairs and not enough answers. CPS sent Ms. Delaney, whose navy blazer looked ironed by a ruler. Animal Control sent Mr. Ruiz, his shirt sleeves rolled and his eyes soft with the kind of sympathy that knows it won't win. The pediatrician, Dr. Gao, joined by speakerphone between rounds. Claire came alone, clutching a notebook full of questions and a tired kind of courage. "We're here to discuss immediate placement," Ms. Delaney began, her tone as careful as a scalpel. "We have 3 potential foster homes cleared and 1 possible relative in Idaho, an aunt on the mother's side. We need to move quickly. Infants bond fast, instability harms them." "She's already bonded," Claire said. "To Bella." Mr. Ruiz exhaled through his nose. "We've got a rescue group willing to pull the dog straight from the clinic to bypass the shelter. It's a good rescue. They love shepherds." "She loves 1 baby," Claire said. "That's not the same." Dr. Gao's voice crackled from the phone. "The infant calms more quickly during canine scent exposure," she said, clinical but kind. "We documented it. If there's a legal path to keep them together, from a developmental standpoint, I'd support it." Ms. Delaney glanced down, flipping to a new page on her clipboard. "There is no statute for co-placement with a dog, doctor." "There wasn't a statute for a lot of things before we made one," Dr. Gao replied. I'm telling you what's best for this child right now. We'll see. Claire felt them like a fence post driven into soft ground. She swallowed. I'll foster, she blurted out, the words surprising her with how ready they'd been. I can apply. I have the space. I work from home. I'll take the classes. Whatever it takes. Place them both with me, temporary until family is found. Just don't split them up. Ms. Delaney's pen hovered. You are not related to the child. I am the reason she was found, Claire said, softly but without apology. And I'm the one Bella trusts enough to close her eyes around. She slid a stack of pages across the table, letters she'd gathered in 24 hours like a woman bailing rain with a cereal bowl. The fire chief, the pediatric nurse, the vet whose burns were healing on Bella's flank, the neighbor who remembered Sunday mornings and the baby carriage on the sidewalk. Each letter carried a small piece of truth, stitched together into something that looked like a family. Mr. Ruiz picked up the top page, blinking as he skimmed the words. I can recommend a companion animal exemption for therapeutic benefit, he offered. It's not common, but it exists for service dogs and, occasionally, unique circumstances. Ms. Delaney frowned. This is not a certified service dog. It's a certified miracle, Mr. Ruiz said under his breath, which made Dr. Gao chuckle in the phone speaker, a pin of warmth in a cold room. They gave Claire forms. So many forms, and a list of steps that felt like a staircase in a storm. Background check. Home assessment. Infant CPR class. A foster family had already said yes and could take the baby that night if needed. Just until we process, Ms. Delaney said, as if those two words had never turned into months for anyone. Outside in the hallway, Claire leaned her forehead against the cool paint and breathed until her ribs loosened. She texted the fire chief. They might separate them, and within minutes her phone lit up like a control panel. The coffee shop taped a donation jar to the register. Keep Bella with baby. The high school art teacher painted their story in watercolor and hung it in the library window. A retired judge Claire had once delivered groceries to during a snowstorm called the county and asked questions in the particular voice people answer. By evening, the hospital waiting area looked like a small town does when it remembers it has a beating heart. Old men in seed caps murmured, women in church cardigan teal passing clipboards. A boy with skinned knees showed Claire a poster he'd made, 2 stick figures, one with triangle ears, both surrounded by a red crayon heart. I told my mom we can't let the government take away best friends, he announced solemnly, as if delivering case law. The clinic let Bella visit again, escorted by a vet tech who cried into her sleeve and pretended it was allergies. The baby opened her eyes and made a soft sound that was almost a sigh. Bella's tail thumped once against the bed. Evidence, Dr. Gao said when Ms. Delaney came by to observe, the words suddenly gentler in her mouth. You wanted data. Here it is. That night, Claire sat at her kitchen table again, signing the last page of the foster application while the printer chugged out copies of every identifying document she owned. Her phone chimed with a new message from someone she didn't know, a lawyer in town offering pro bono help for as long as it takes. Another ping, an aunt in Idaho confirming she existed, asking for a day to get her bearings, telling them she'd loved her sister fiercely and wanted whatever was best for the baby. It was the first time hope felt complicated, braided with the humility of realizing what's best might include losing what you love. In the morning there was a home visit. Claire walked Ms. Delaney through the rooms she'd scrubbed until the lemon oil smell followed them like a blessing. Outlets capped, cleaning supplies locked, smoke detectors tested twice. In the corner of the spare room, a borrowed crib, neatly made, on the floor beside it, a dog bed the size of a heartbeat. You've prepared, Ms. Delaney said, and there was no judgment in it, only quiet observation. I don't know another way to love, Claire replied, surprising herself again. The decision would be by the book, they said, which was both a comfort and a threat. It meant hearings and signatures, codes and clauses. It meant the judge who would read letters written in cursive and crayon. It meant the aunt's voice from Idaho on speakerphone, steady but trembling, saying she could be there by Friday. It meant Mr. Ruiz filing his rare exemption request and Dr. Gao faxing a statement that a dog's presence had measurable benefit. It meant a real possibility that somewhere in those pages, a line would clip them apart like scissors. On the morning of the hearing, the courthouse smelled faintly of floor wax and old paper. Claire wore the second-best dress she owned and the only courage she had. The gallery was half full of people who had decided this story was theirs, too. Neighbors with folded hands, the fire chief in a clean uniform, the vet in scrubs, a classroom of fourth graders watching the live stream and waving construction paper paws whenever the camera panned. The judge was the kind who looked like he'd been born in that chair, wise and a little weary. He listened, really listened, to Ms. Delaney's adherence to process, to Mr. Ruiz's quavering description of a dog who had stood guard in smoke because something more than training told her to Dr. Gao, who spoke of infants and attachments and neural pathways written not only by people but by warmth and breath and belonging, to the aunt on the line from Idaho, who didn't pretend she had answers, only love and a promise to come. Finally he turned to Claire. "Ms. Whitaker," he said, and the echo of her name in that room made her spine straighten. "Why you?" She could have spoken about logistics, home setups and schedules, bank statements and background checks. Instead she told the truth the way you confess a prayer. "Because I saw a dog teach me what it means to wait for someone," she said, hands folded so tightly her knuckles had no blood. "Because a baby who had no words told me with her breathing that she recognized a scent on my shirt. Because I understand that family is sometimes what survives together. And because until her aunt arrives, until we all know what best truly looks like, I can keep them both safe together without asking them to learn another kind of loneliness." The room held its breath. Even the radiator seemed to listen. The judge nodded once, as if answering a thought only he could hear. He shuffled the papers in front of him, the soft rasp of legal fibers passing over one another sounding like wind through dry leaves. "I am bound by statutes," he said, and Claire felt the floor tilt. "But statutes are built to serve the lives before us, not the other way around." He cleared his throat. "I will issue a temporary order. The beat. The infant shall be placed in provisional foster care with Ms. Whitaker pending the relative's in-person evaluation. Animal Control's companion exemption is granted. The German Shepherd known as Bella may reside in the home as a therapeutic companion during the same period. All parties will reconvene in 7 days." The gallery's sigh was a kind of prayer. Mr. Ruiz wiped his eyes like a man who'd stared too long at smoke. Ms. Delaney's pen scratched notes that looked, for once, less like fences and more like bridges. The judge rapped his gavel once, crisp as a period at the end of a long sentence. In the hallway, Claire leaned back against the cool marble and let it carry her weight. Her phone buzzed wildly in her hand, neighbors cheering, the coffee shop offering free cinnamon rolls for the family, fourth graders texting paw emojis, the aunt from Idaho sending one simple line, "Thank you for keeping her soft parts safe until I get there." Later, when the hospital finally released the baby into her arms and the clinic staff walked Bella out on a new red leash, they met in the parking lot where a sycamore held its leaves like a sheltering hand. The baby made that soft almost sigh again. Bella wagged once and stepped in, resting her chin on the edge of the blanket as if the last week had been a bad dream they were now allowed to wake from together. It wasn't over. Claire knew that like you know the weather by the ache in your bones. There would be more rooms, more forms, more ways for life to change shape in her hands. But for now the system had bent toward mercy. For now, The three of them walked to the car as if drawn by the same quiet gravity, the kind that holds planets in place and keeps small hearts from breaking. It's the connections we don't understand that make life so remarkable. If this story touched you, share your thoughts below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more heartwarming stories. Until next time, stay curious and never stop believing.